First of all, thank you for joining us today, Andy. I'm honored here to be joined by Andy Timmons. Andy is widely respected not only as a world-class guitarist, but as a deeply musical, expressive, and thoughtful artist whose playing also serves the song. From Danger Danger to his solo work, session work, and long-standing reputation as a player's player, Andy represents something rare: technical mastery without ego, emotion without excess, and a lifelong devotion to musical honesty. This
Wow.
conversation is part of an ongoing project called Mind Behind the Music, exploring the creative, psychological, and human side of musicianship. Again, Andy, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. Welcome, man.
John, thank you, man. That was a very sweet intro. I mean, I can't think of any nicer way to describe my life and what I'm trying to do with music. And it's an ongoing process from the original memory of me recognizing what a guitar was to where I sit with you today. It's all I can hope for is to have that kind of reputation and to keep striving to get better. That's kind of the ongoing path here. Continued desire to improve and to play better and connect with other people.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. Is there anything that you'd like to add as far as your credentials, maybe?
Yeah, it's interesting because if you look at my career trajectory, it's a little haphazard in a way, but that's kind of part of the beauty. I think is I can look back on it now a bit more objectively. When I'm in it, it's just you're in the middle of whatever's happening. You're just giving that everything and just
Yeah, you're not
not
really
really not knowing where it's going to head. So
right.
growing up, I grew up in Evansville, Indiana, and started playing when I was about 5 or 6. But by the age of 10, I'm starting to learn some songs by ear, that kind of thing. And finally got into my first band when I was 13, and I've never not been in a band since then. So there was this ongoing, you know, effort to make music and be in a band, and wherever that led, I didn't have a specific goal that developed along the way. I think it just that I just loved the guitar and music so much. So certainly rock and roll early on, but that led into anything that I heard guitar and I wanted to know how to do. And that which of course encouraged me to study jazz, learn how to read eventually. But I was self-taught to about 16. So that the band I was in, the Taylor Bay band, that was, from the age of 13 to about 19 when I left for Miami for my third and fourth year of college. My first 2 years of college, I was a classical major in Evansville, Indiana, and then heard about the jazz department down in Miami. And so I thought, well, by then I was, along with the rock and roll, I was taking lessons from a local jazz teacher. And it was broadening my palette, and I was listening to guys beyond the rock realm, because I started off with Kiss. You got your Kiss shirt on there. That was my first concert in 1976. I saw the Destroyer tour. There were some kids that lived behind me. Butted up to my mom's house was butted up to an apartment complex. And that was my exposure to Kiss. There was these slightly older guys in the neighborhood they somehow fashioned costume, put on the makeup, and would do a concert. They'd put Kiss Alive on and just mime to it but they had the makeup on, and it was,
Yeah,
it
it's
was a
awesome, man.
blast. It was a blast. That's kind of what turned me on to that next
Yeah.
part of rock and roll, because I was into all the 60s pop, because I had 3 older brothers buying all that music. But yeah, fond memories that time of my life. And then to end up in a band, Danger Danger, opening for, Kiss
Yes.
on a couple of tours. We did part of the Hot in the Shade tour and part of the Revenge tour in the UK. So that was, something again,
Great.
1,000%, because I was, growing up in a small town in Indiana, and I didn't, the chip wasn't installed to dream big for me. It was just like,
Just do it
it was kind
because
of,
it's what
that was like fantasy land. I just thought, well, I'm just going to keep playing. So, but as fate would have it, I honed my skills. I went to Miami. I met great players. I was in a more jazzy, fusion-y kind of guys, but never left the rock and roll. And by the time I ended up in Texas, ended up forming my own band after a stint with a band called Brinker, and that's how I ended up in Texas. Was Steve Bailey, an incredible bass player. He's the head of Berkeley bass department now, and a
yeah,
German, Ray Brinker.
it's familiar.
Yeah, Steve is a heavyweight in the bass world, and Ray Brinker also in the drum world. He was just leaving Maynard Ferguson's band and wanted to form a rock band. I was kind of the rock guy on the campus in Miami, so through that reputation, met Steve, and we moved to Texas. Those guys had gone to North Texas State University, which is another highly acclaimed jazz school. So I didn't go to that school, but I ended up in town with musicians to record the record. But then ended up forming my own band, and that demo of that record, the early sessions for what became my Ear Ecstasy record, but that got circulated, and that's how I got the Danger Danger audition. They were signed and looking for a kind of a hired gun guitar player, and that's how I got that gig. But then, getting to those tours with Kiss, like you say, if that's your first concert and you're going, oh my God, this is what I want to do.
Yeah.
I couldn't have even tried to, picture that, but just very blessed that along the way with a lot of hard work, the universe somehow put some things in front of me. And this is a good thing to share, that there was a guy named Don Ellis who, when I first joined Danger Danger, I was playing Kramer guitars. That was my first endorsement. In fact, it was Buddy Blaze, who was the artist relations guy with Kramer, that he was a big factor in early Dimebag Darrell guitars and Vivian Campbell. He designed that Night Swan and some of those guitars. He's the one that knew that Danger Danger needed a player. So anyway, I was out in between tours with Danger Danger. I would do guitar clinics for Kramer. And I was on the road with this guy, Don Ellis, and he just shooting the breeze on the way in between towns. He says, man, how'd you get the gig in Danger Danger? And my first instinct was to say, oh man, I guess I just got lucky. And he said, no, you didn't. He said, you worked your ass off your entire life. And when the opportunity came, you were ready. And he was absolutely right. And so I started changing, it was a lovely humbleness of the way I was answering it. But at the same time, he was correct, and it wasn't a matter of, I couldn't have imagined that was going to be the band knocking on my door. At the very same time, I had a call from Tower of Power, if you know those guys. They're a fusion funk band based in Oakland that's incredibly well known in the we'll call it the muso world, the jazzy fusion. And so they offered to have me on as a guitar player, because I knew that one of the horn players had gone to Miami, came out to audition at a gig, and they loved what I played. But I had the choice between the two, and this kind of musically credible, musician-based band, or, MTV-headed, Bon Jovi kind of stuff, And that was, my heart was more towards the rock and roll thing at that time. And so, but I was ready. That is true. So that continues to be, every gig I've gotten along the way has all kind of happened like that. I couldn't have tried to make it happen, but something, came in my pathway, and I was ready and made the choice to do it. Over time, I start to be a bit more picky, of course, but early on, when you're working and you're just trying to figure out how you're going to make your way in the music world. My thought in a small town in Indiana, I thought, making it in the music, like in a band on a major label, was like winning the lottery. It just didn't seem possible. But then there I was at that point in a band, but learning very quickly that, okay, maybe that wasn't the Holy Grail, seeing at least the machinations of the music business at that time. It's just very different now, of course, but this is that early 90s, late 80s, early 90s. So it along the way, you're just kind of figuring out what's important, and you're finding who you are. I mean, it wasn't until I was in my 50s maybe that I started feeling comfortable being me.
Your own voice as.
You know what I mean? It's like, I think there's some guys like Eddie Van Halen that it was pretty clear early on. I was more kind of a journeyman, student in a way. I kept evolving and kept just trying to improve. I mean, I would have friends point out that they heard that I had a voice, but I was too close to it. I couldn't see that. So along the way, that kind of happens, whether you're trying to make it happen or not. You're gonna be you. It's just then being comfortable with that and realizing that as long as you're honoring that, as long as you're honoring whatever gift you have, and you're working hard at that, then that's enough. You're not going to be Alan Holdsworth or Eric Johnson. It's like you can be a huge fan of those players, but to think that you're going to be that. But I think that's a problem for a lot of players. They might have heroes, and I'm certainly guilty of it in the past, where it can be daunting and almost discouraging sometimes. But the more I've grown and realized, and it's just, embrace what they have to offer, get what you can from that, but it's going to come out filtered through your prism of experience, and so because I'm into those guys, I'm also into Ace Frehley and Barney Kessel. These aren't common combinations of players, so at some point that comes out as me and my limitations, that I can't do those other things. But through that, you find things that you personally do okay, you know, and you support those. But I try, man, I try every day. That's my first thing in the morning. I get up and pick up the guitar and make sure that I get that time in before the day takes off and you have all these other responsibilities. At least I'm making that attempt and trying to add little bits of things. I know that when people ask me for, advice about learning and playing, and it's usually more about people finding the time or making the time, because people's lives are busy. And if they're not, even though I'm a full-time musician from the majority of my life, even in that realm, it's not all about the guitar playing,
Yeah.
if you're having to take care of a lot of other stuff. And then of course there's a family involved. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, for
Try to
me,
balance
man,
that.
what works for me, and I mean, obviously sleep is a valuable commodity, but I just make sure I get up early and take advantage of the time, usually before anybody else gets up.
That's
No.
time management and, doing it before everybody gets up. I'm,
Yeah.
kind of the opposite. I'm the guy that waits for everybody to go to bed, you know?
Okay. Well, yeah. I
So,
think I think that switch flipped for me when my son was born 20 almost
I had
20
no
almost
choice.
22 years ago. Yeah, wherever you can find it, but I hear you. Yeah, the late night can be they used to be for me, man. When I was living in New York in Danger, I'd up until 5 in the morning. That was just life, kind of flipped around.
After a while, once your life begins getting really busy, and of course, as a professional like yourself, your job is music, and
That's true.
you have to find a way to balance everything, like your personal life with that, and your
Yeah.
family time, and stay grounded at the same time. And
Yeah.
I think for me, just to elaborate a little bit on what you were talking about, that again, it's time management and making the time that you do invest the most productive. I've
Exactly.
realized over the years that I could practice less and still be able to maintain or to achieve what I used to do in, 10 hours of practicing.
Yeah.
This
Yeah.
it's your focus, your
Yeah.
being organized, knowing exactly what you're gonna do when you approach it, and have the right attitude toward it.
That's a really good point. There's been a lot of it's been interesting that, of course we now have access to so much information. So I make a point to check out a lot of people's, when they're talking about effective practice, because it's something that I want to get better at. I'll be the first to admit I don't think I've ever been until recently the best practicer. I was always playing. I don't know that the time I spent, even though it was enjoyable and certainly worked for me, if it was the most effective. Now, I'm 62, I'll never be happy with where I'm at, but I can look and say, okay, there's good things happening. I worked really hard to get here, but I also see the potential, you know. So I do enjoy
It's the
going to
beauty
jam.
of music, man, because it's
Oh,
never ending.
it never ends. So the thing is that, there's lots of scientific information coming out about taking these short breaks. So the last 2 days, because we're iced in, not going anywhere. Not that the majority of the day when I'm not touring is I'm I'm home base. I've got my studio here at the office. But I practiced a lot the last 2 days. But I made a point after because I can feel myself within an hour getting fatigued. Maybe just the mental, a bit of the physical. So I would then take a break, go sit somewhere else in the house, and try to not do too much
Change the atmosphere a
mentally.
little bit.
So I think that what that does is it gives your mind a chance to kind of, filter through what you're
Process.
learning. That processing process, so to speak. Yeah, and it made sense to me, and I had some good breakthroughs yesterday. There's a couple of things I'd been working on that seemed to have a bit more clarity, but now it's gonna be up to me to every day, I gotta keep
Right.
that up.
The consistency, that's
If I wanted
crucial.
if I wanna make it, part of the vocabulary, so that's the tricky part. You can have a great practice day,
You know,
but that's that day. What's tomorrow, you know?
it's not what you did yesterday, it's what you do every day.
Exactly that. Yeah, that's a
Yeah.
that's a good point. I'll get into this good flow, and then whatever project I'm working on maybe gets busier or there's a tour coming, and so there's a lot of things that can derail it, but,
You know,
again, on the road, the last 2 tours I did, I really did a better job of consistent practice, and that was enhanced by just getting a cool pair of these Waza headphones. It's a Boss product that has a little wireless quarter inch that transmits to your headphones. So we were most of the tours, at least in Europe, we travel in a van. So we're traveling in the day. So I get the back seat of the van. I can put my headphones on and it connects to your phone so I can jam with whatever iReal book,
Yeah, what a
yeah, just standards or whatever I want to work on. And so, yeah, because there's doing travel, there's a huge amount of downtime, and I love sitting at airports and playing. I'll get to that airport early because I hate the stress of not getting to the airport early because
yeah, I
know
know.
you never know what's going to happen.
You know,
So anyway, so that's
that you get to the plane.
so
Yeah,
I'm getting better at it is what I'm trying to say. It's like, and that's another thing too. Is well, you're 62, Well, yeah, Pablo Casals was asked when he was 80, Maestro, you still practice 3 hours a day. Why? He goes, I'm starting to see some improvement, and that's, those are good news.
it's the passion for music. I mean, some people are just it's in their blood, and
Yeah.
that's what separates those that have longevity
Yeah.
to those that don't.
Mm.
In my opinion, I
Yeah.
mean, like some of these bands, we're talking about 80s that
Yeah.
put out a couple hits and you never heard from them.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because in those situations, it's not necessarily always about dedication, but it's about opportunity and trends. You know what I mean? So, I was fortunate in my time with Danger that, yeah, there was a pretty hard cutoff from MTV about
Early 90s,
they weren't gonna play any music from bands of that ilk, you know?
which is messed up, man, because rock music carried MTV for like 10 years.
Yeah.
And
Well,
we all have our opinions on it. I'm sure.
no, for sure, and there's lots to talk about on that, but we don't have to get too bogged down, but for me, it was like, if you think about the guys in Warrant or whoever the bands might be, I had a lot to do because I was already making my solo record during that time. It became Ear Ecstasy, and I was a session player, so sadly, when Danger just realized we're not going to go forward, the label didn't put out the third record, and there was all kinds of lawsuits and stuff. It's like, well, I just went back to Texas and got back with my band and just did sessions and took whatever gig I was playing in the church on Sunday and doing local whatever gigs I could do. I had no money, there I was in this band,
Like,
traveling the world, yeah. But honestly, my ego didn't explode in a bad way. It was interesting. I saw it for what it was, and it's a bit of a mess with your mind when you get into these situations where people are, idolizing you a little bit.
you constantly.
It's an interesting. It's Danger didn't get big enough to have real problems. You know what I mean? Like I think a real problem is fame and money. Honestly, every time, right? So when you're that famous and you can't go anywhere, or there's lots of money, that there's going to cause problems. So we managed to avoid both of those things, but it was close. It was close enough, and living in that world a bit to kind of see it for what it was, but also to recognize, like, as I mentioned before, that, this maybe not be the holy grail that I thought it was. It was a blast, and I've treasured that time. We had such good times, man. It was a lot of fun to be able to do that and to play these arenas and
That experience.
yeah, and so it was a bit of that childhood fantasy, but so that part was fun, but then the business part was like, oh dear, this is, I just want to be, because before all that, it was like, I just want to be a great player, and at that point, you're just like more about, well, don't cut your hair and lose 5 pounds. That was what I was told when I got the gigs. What does that have to do with,
Yeah,
that?
that's it
It,
back then. That was all about image back then.
well, yeah, and to a large degree, it kind of still is. It's something that I struggle with because there's so much facade in general that I don't resonate with. Yeah, I wish I looked like a cool rock star all the time. It's not in the cards for me. But just I don't know. At the end of the day, I'm happiest focusing on what matters most to me, and that's just authenticity of the music that I write and record. And if I'm in a situation where it's not my thing, then I'm just going to do the best I can for what's needed at that situation. Like you mentioned in my intro about playing for the song
Yeah,
and playing for the situation. And a lot of gigs I've done, that's been a big part of having success with playing with.
yeah. Doing
Yeah.
session work too.
Yeah.
Which I've ran into issues like that, where you have to be versatile and not
Mm.
necessarily is it, your genre or your thing, but you have to use the tools that you have to the
Yeah.
best of your ability to produce the best product. I was in a, like screamo kind of shit, and
Right on.
I'm all about melody and
Oh, I dig screamo. My son's in a death metal band, and some of it's absolutely incredible, including his band, Disdain. They're about to put their second record out.
uh,
There's some great musicianship in that stuff, you know. It's not what I listen to every day, but it's you know, I can really respect and admire when it's done well, like
the
any.
talent. Yeah, the talent.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm old school kinda. Randy Rose was my biggest
Oh,
inspiration,
yeah, man.
so I
Yeah,
got into the classical thing too and studied
sure.
classical. Randy was like my idol. But, when I got together with these guys, I mean, they were each individually very talented, and
Yeah.
they were doing it wasn't just like screamo. I don't know what, genre you would really consider it, but, it was along the lines of Arch Enemy and some of them other bands like Jeff Loomis kinda
Yeah.
stuff, I don't know
Yeah.
if you're familiar with him, but
I know about Jeff
Chris
for sure.
Rock,
But yeah, both Chris and Jeff are great players.
yeah, they are.
Yeah.
But that was a new thing for me to familiarize myself with that kinda, style of music, and it was very challenging, which I loved, so
Sure.
I
Yeah.
had to, do my best to utilize the skills that I had with what I had mentioned in the beginning, which is playing for the song.
Yeah. Well, that's the goal, you know. And it is funny because sometimes somebody might want me to do exactly whatever it is I would do naturally, but then there are some sessions you do where they need, specific things. And I enjoy each of those roles equally. It's a lot of fun for me, and again when I was doing a lot more local sessions, it's not happening as much these days, but back in the 80s and 90s and somewhat through the 2000s, there was a bigger recording session scene happening, commercials and jingles and whatever. So they could always rely on me to know that I'm gonna be really familiar with the history of guitar that came before me. If they need a Steve Cropper thing, if they need a country thing, if they need a Lukather thing, they know that I'm gonna come in and have something at least in the ballpark, at least have an understanding, and so they wouldn't have to write specific parts. They knew I could just come in and so that there's those producers that would come to rely on that, and and again, that's fun for me because I have such respect and love for the history of recorded guitar that I like a challenge of like, yeah, how can I replicate that? How can I live in that world a little bit? What guitar was used? What amp was used?
That's
That's
awesome,
fun.
man.
I
Yeah,
love
so
them. Uh,
yeah, you definitely can learn a lot from it, and, it opens your mind too, and
yeah, oh, for sure.
and because you're the type of player based on this conversation so far that tells me that you've always been really focused on the love for music, which has been your root
Yeah.
of direction.
Now,
Yeah,
see, that frames it perfectly because I'm just a fan, and music has been my security blanket my whole life. It's just where I've always lived. You know what I mean? But it can go so drastic. Like I've got this set of solo pieces that I've got 9 of the 12 recorded. It'll be the next record that I put out called the Outlier Nocturnes. And I'd gone down this path of obsessing over Chopin, his piano pieces, specifically his nocturnes, which is generally they're fairly dark emotional pieces, you know what I mean? There's some that are upbeat, but it's primarily a very emotional type of composition, and his writing style, you know,
Romanticism, right?
it can be chromaticism. It's just his sense of emotion and how he gets that from how he builds things, what notes he chooses and the harmonies that he chooses. Not putting myself anywhere in that league, but it was similar to things that I was doing, and the deeper I dug into his body of work, it just made me feel like, well, this guy was doing it, in
Yeah.
1830 and on the deepest possible level. I don't feel that from very many composers. So I'll go down that path, but I'm continually going back to Beatles, and I'll go down a Tom Petty path. And that's the health, or now, Wes Montgomery and Pat Metheny and Mike Stern. There'll just be a lane that I'll get into for a while, and that'll really serve me on a high level, and it feeds everything. So I'm working a lot on jazz stuff right now, but everything that I play in rock and roll is very much informed by all that information that I take in, and it gives me a unique look at how I treat harmony, and I'm very much in the moment of each chord as opposed to shredding in a key. Both are very valuable, and I love that approach, and I'm trying to do some of the former, meaning like
Limiting, play the key of B, and we're gonna play a pentatonic scale.
yeah. And now there's a lifetime of music to be made there. You know, arguably Stevie Ray Vaughan and the blues guys. There doesn't have to be this incredible deep vocabulary. You don't I would often say to anybody coming for a lesson, you don't have to know everything. I mean, people can get very bogged down with information because of the internet and like, you know, thinking they need to know all the theory and the scales, and that can be helpful along the way, but if that foundation's not there, it's going to be pointless. And that's where guys like Stevie Ray, you know, shone so brightly is that, you know, he didn't have, you know, what you might call an extended
Vocabulary.
vocabulary, but the way he stated everything was the best that ever was, you know, just with such conviction, with such authenticity and emotion and feel, but put together in a million ways. You know what I mean? There's so many things you can do with just that pentatonic and maybe the blues scale. You know, it's endless. It's endless. But you know, and if that's your focus, then there's plenty of work to do, and it's all about application. And he
True.
played a million gigs and got phenomenal at it. So but it's this then a matter of your taste and your prism, like we talked about earlier. You know, what is it that you love? You know, that's how we become us, is by just all these things that we take into what I call the RLect, like your musical library, your musical
Language. I mean, you think
yes.
about it, you're just learning new
Yes.
vocabulary and better ways to express yourself. Personally, I never was a blues guy,
What?
only because it was always based around the 12-bar blues. That kind of bored me. And I love classical music because it's so intelligent and
Yeah.
it's symmetrical and you're talking about guys like Chopin and I mean, I love the approach and I love how intelligent they were about writing
Sure.
music in general. And when you're in music school and you take music analysis, you have to dissect the piece is pretty cool. To,
Very revealing.
yeah, to basically follow their whole structure. I've done this, which you have to do because I had to write a sonata. And I took one of the box works. It was what is it? BWV or something like that.
Yeah, that's yeah, that's how that most of his catalog numbers. Yeah, it's pretty difficult to remember all things numerical, which you know it becomes a bit tricky to memorize that.
999. So
Nice. That's
followed that whole the chord progression of everything and
mhm.
the modulations,
Sure.
stuff like that, which was a great experience for me because on my own I would have never even thought of that.
Invaluable, yeah. But that's with learning any piece of music by learning that's how the Beatles got to be great songwriters. They learned a bunch of tunes, you know?
Which blows my mind that Paul McCartney does not know how to read music.
Well, it's not necessary. I mean, again, it can be helpful, but what he got is what I call the oral act. You know, they were learning, besides Chuck Berry and Buddy Holly, they start learning the show tunes from their parents' records because they needed more songs because they were playing such lengthy sets in Hamburg. And that was the education that set them apart, you know, and by using their ears and not their eyes. I mean, yeah, you can see stuff visually, but it's not the same as old school reference, but putting the needle on the record. And what is that? You know, not enough people are doing that. And they can still be increasing their skills, but it's not the important part, which is the ear. That's, at the end of the day, music is oral, not visuals.
Yeah, and it's also about creativity and
Yeah. Well, there you go.
and the song, which we've been
Mhm.
saying, we've been talking about.
Yeah.
It's about creating a song. When I first started playing, you got guys like Ingrid Malmsteen, Joe
Oh, yeah.
Satriani.
Yeah.
Of course, you want to be as good as them guys. So,
Yeah. I did. I still do. Trust me. Dude, they're still two of my biggest heroes, man. You know?
mm, you and I both, man.
But,
But your technique is amazing. Let's use me
yeah.
as an example. So, I had all the technique or whatever and the theory, the basic theory, but could I write a song? Could I write, a kick-ass rock song that could be simple as 3 chords and be able to put so much emotion into it and beautiful melody, and it's all about being able to play for the song, as
Yeah.
we've been discussing,
Yeah.
I realized that the hard way after focusing on technique all the time. It's like I could shred, but the and it's not like I couldn't write music, but could I write a good song? I could write a
But
good guitar solo, but I had to learn that skill.
something that, that's why Joe was above the heap at that time, especially because he was a good songwriter. He had chops for forever, but they were all really good tunes.
Yeah.
Every single one of them that I can recall. There's always a good melody. There's a good energy. Sure, plenty of place to play, and that's the fun part too. So, but he found that balance early on, and that's what attracted, I think, most people to him. In addition to the technique. Ingve was a guy for me where, the technique is jaw dropping, but after a few songs, I might feel a little limited. I finally saw him. I didn't see him live until he and I are the same age. So we were 50. So he came through Dallas and I hadn't seen him. I've been around him a couple of times, but hadn't seen a show. And it easily top 5 guitar shows I've ever seen. It was stunning. It was so freaking great, and so so kind of his abilities, but after that, it was even higher up.
One thing that interests me, Andy, is you did mention that up until recently you hadn't really had a practice routine.
I would say, yeah, I had a practice kind of time, but not a like I'm still working on. Well, I want to find a bit more discipline is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. Well, you got people like Ingve, speaking of Ingve, that
Okay.
said that he never practices. Considering he's always playing, that's, in my opinion, that's still practice.
Well, that's an interesting point because it isn't. He's just playing stuff he already knows.
Maintaining.
Maintain and I think that's a lot of my practice time was kind of that. Even though you might be practicing, your improvisational skills, and that's how I was. A lot of my practice, so to speak, was a lot of just playing jazz standards first thing in the morning, which is it's technical work. It's a lot of mental and oral work because I'm trying to weave melodies in real time, and that's my goal. I didn't want to think scalar. I didn't want to think too much, but I wanted my ear to guide me and have the ability to be able to navigate those chord changes. But now what I'm trying to do is to have a bit more. I started playing scales at 80 beats per minute. Like a real slow metronomics. Going
Starting to play slow.
It can be. It can be, and to stay comfortable doing it.
Yeah, make sure that every note is precise, and
Yes.
your attack on every single note is precise.
That's honestly not as much a problem for me, but well, meaning at a faster tempo, for me, it's focus. You know what I'm saying? That my technique in that tempo is solid. It's not that it can't be improved. It can be. But part of the reason I'm doing it is that I think our minds are so defragmented by the flood of information, through social media, through YouTube feeds, and whatever stuff that we're getting assaulted with. Your phone going off every 2 minutes.
Yeah, like
Focus is becoming, at least for me. I think it's a social problem. So
yeah,
it's on me to make sure I'm
wait, man.
turning off every device and just 80 beats per minute. Okay, I'm going to go through all 12 modes, or what? Yeah, all 12 keys, and all the modes, but then in different, melodic minor and working on half whole diminished, and just I'll start increasing it because that's slow. You know what I'm saying? As the technique, of course, and I'm warmed up. But that's been a good exercise, and also just making sure I'm genuinely learning something new. What can I do to and I usually suggest it just doesn't have to be the entire John Coltrane giant step solo. Great if you want to do it, but learn that lick, learn that one thing that okay, so Eric Gales is my focus right now. He's just one of my favorite players, one of my favorite people. And he just does things better than a lot of people. And certain things that he does, certain isms that all his brothers played that like that. His older brother was a guy named Little Jimmy King. And I didn't know they were brothers until years later. But there's a certain float and a certain feel. And so I've been digging into some of his things just to see if I can assimilate some of that thing that I love so much. Why wouldn't I want to be able to, not to be a sound alike, but to break it down to see, and a lot of the stuff that I'm finding from him is just a mastery of some of the pentatonic stuff. And so I'm finding that my knowledge of pentatonic is way not as high as it should be. Like really not. I can play in the because I know the notes, but to really flow and tie it together like a master, like Eric Gales is, it's a different level. So okay, give me some of that, right? And so that's part of the breakthrough I had yesterday was understanding. Okay, I could connect things in a different way, and even for anybody on any level, when you hit that little there's that crack in the door and you go, oh wow, okay, I'm seeing things from a slightly different perspective. It's a magical thing. So I got some of that in the last couple of days.
It's
But,
awesome, dude.
because I just made the shift in my mind of knowing that this is something I need to do. A lot of the things that we can improve on, we know what to do.
Yeah.
You got to play. You got to stop scrolling. You got to,
Mhm.
these are the distinctions that I'm making right now. Just part of it's for mental health
Yeah.
to not spend as much time dealing with a lot of stuff that isn't always positive for you. And then, but also, man, when I've had a good practice session, it does something for my soul. I recognize as being really, really one of the most important things for my happiness in my life.
It releases endorphins and also
That's the thing.
check.
The good type of dopamine, again, the same thing you're talking about. And that was a video that I saw. I talk about, watching the, videos about taking breaks, but the dopamine detox is a thing. And that's what the scrolling has done for us. We're just wanting that
Instant gratitude.
instant gratification
Yeah.
of whatever it is we're seeing and whatever it might be. So it's just good to be aware of that's the thing. We don't have to totally, go, uh,
The extreme opposite.
extreme opposite, but it's, man, just healthy. It's all, as with everything, is your yin yang behind you. It's about balance, right? That's the thing to strive for. So
I wanted to elaborate a little bit on Eric Gales, okay?
sure.
You know, I play left-handed with my strings completely upside down like Eric.
You do right on.
I do, man. And I'm different from Eric because, as you mentioned, he's a more pentatonic guy or whatever. And
Sure. And I'm not boxing him in.
right,
He's got a lot of other
listen to
vocabulary too. But that's one of the things that he excels, and just kills, So
I'm only really aware of him because of the way that he plays like me. But I'm a very technical player. I'm playing upside down and doing stuff like Dream Theater. You
nice.
know? So I've actually, I've had to learn things both forward and backward for that reason. And,
All right.
it's been a challenge at first, but I never thought of it as being wrong, and
It's not. Yeah, it's just the way you do it.
yeah, there's certain chords that I can't really fret properly. And there's
Okay.
also chords that I could do that people can't, you know.
I noticed that when I'm studying Eric's playing, it's really difficult for me to visualize. That's why I just got to hear it, because if I'm looking at it like
You're lost.
it's confusing. But yeah, I recognize there's things that he's going to be able to do that I can't, and maybe vice versa.
That's where
So you
I
got
had trouble with studying classical guitar.
oh, yeah.
Because when they're using their, like, thumb and having to use, like, a Dicio or Medio or whatever, instead of the thumb, so it makes, like, technique, like, almost impossible. But I took the impression that I got from classical music, maybe not necessarily the techniques, but the structure of writing and the final impression that I got from it. And I always try to incorporate that into, my music.
Right
And,
on.
there's other things I can't really do, like, Rep Beach. I took
Oh,
lessons from him,
wow.
some lessons from him. And,
Yeah.
he does the, tapping thing, but where most, players descend when they're tapping, he has it to where he's, setting up the neck as he
Man,
taps,
his
which is
technique with that is so unique to him, man. He's got such a voice, doesn't he?
yeah, it's super cool, man. But he was explaining it to me, and you know, to hit the next string, he's actually using his thumb. It's like impossible for me to do
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
So I've had to come up with a lot of workarounds, and
Sure.
I
But then that's
also
gonna lead you to doing stuff that maybe nobody's done before, that's
absolutely
So you gotta
Uh,
look at that, Mike Stern once said that, our limitations become our strengths, because what forms our uniqueness, you know? You
yeah,
gotta look at it.
especially I've had to learn both, um, you know, upside down because my technique.
Yeah,
So I'm not gonna just switch it,
right.
because I've been playing so long like that.
Yeah, it would be hard for me to do that for sure.
So, but, as a teacher, I've had to learn to, play correctly, and, show the chords and everything. So I've had to have my strings when I teach the correct way. So I've, been able to visualize it both forward and backward. And I
Yeah,
have absolutely no technique when I play it the right way. Like if I'm doing lead, when I'm doing an ascending run, my low E is on the bottom,
yeah, yeah,
so I'm building up. So a cool thing that I did is having the strings strung the right way, playing those riffs that I normally would play upside down,
yeah.
and starting on the high E, it gives it a really weird sound to it.
But that's cool, man.
Um, Eddie, so what do you think younger musicians misunderstand most about making a life in music?
What they misunderstand, that's a really hard to quantify what that would
Put you on
be.
the spot, right?
Well, yeah, it's an interesting way to approach thought about it, but, I it's such a wild west about what it is to actually make a living as a musician, you know? All I can say is what worked for me, and that was just the general aesthetic of treating every gig like it's the most important gig you're ever gonna do, and that will always lead to other good things. I didn't set out as that wasn't my ethos specifically. It was just something that I was doing because of the work ethic that I had because of my mother. For whatever reason, I was just wired a certain way. Every gig I did, I was uber prepared, easy to get along with. Not things that I said, this is what I need to do to make it in the music business, but that it's, maybe that's something that's misunderstood that, you know, these are the most important things, and you don't have to be the world's greatest player to do well, but it's the other things that matter. If you're on
Yeah.
tour, you're the best player in the band, but you're a complete mess or hard to get along with. You're not going to get the gig the next time around. So, but I can see the path because I'm 62 and I've done so many different things. The consistent thread is that even if it's a local gig, playing some covers with some friends, I, I, I would treat the music and the other players with the respect. But mainly it started off very selfish. I don't want to suck. I want to know what it is I got to play. I want to do the best I can, whatever time I can put into it. It's not always possible, of course, but if it's a matter of looking at an iPad, reading the gig or taking the time to learn the songs and really playing, that's a common thing now. I see a lot of people with their iPads,
Being
even
prepared.
even singers, looking at their iPhone for the lyrics. Like, what kind of connection can you hope to have with an audience when that's what you're
Looking
doing?
at the lyrics, yeah.
Now, if you're playing in 8 cover bands and, 40 songs on the set list, okay, there's limitations. But
Yeah,
what worked for me, I was always the guy that knew the songs inside and out.
yeah.
There was a gig that I did in 1993 at the NAMM show. So
Mm.
however many years ago that was. 1993, it was called the Ibanez Axe Attack. So it was Joe Satriani, Steve Vai, Paul Gilbert, Alex Skolnick, Reb Beach, Sean Lane, and me. So myself, Simon Phillips, and Gerald Veasley were brought on to be the backing band for everybody. And this is how I first met Simon Phillips. And this gig led to another, you know,
Open up the
couple
doors.
couple of decades of work together. I ended up touring 4 years later. Simon called me for a tour, but here's why. We were playing some of his material, which was really complex fusion stuff. Came in, had that wired. Joe Satriani couldn't make it to rehearsal. Oh, I know those songs. Got to rehearse the band. So it was a great night for me because at that point I'd only done Danger Danger. But though I was wanting to be more like the Satriani, Vi level, Paul Gilbert level, instrumental guys. So then I got put on that stage to be able to be part of this night and came in treating it like it was the most important gig of my life. And it kind of was in a way because that was taking me to that next level.
Yeah.
But that was Simon. So Simon saw that work ethic and thought, and obviously liked the way I played on top of that.
And your
He nee
personality probably.
when he yeah, when so when he needed a guitar player, 4 years later for a tour, I was the first call for him, you know? And then that relationship, led me to Olivia Newton-John, which couldn't be more contrapuntal musically, but she needed a guitar player in 1999 for a couple of months of tour dates, and Brett Garzard was the other guitar player, couldn't make the gig. She was managed by Toto's management, which was the band Simon was in. "Hey, guys, we need a guitar player." "Oh, this guy Andy," he could, he'd kill on that. So that became the next 15 years of the biggest part of my income.
Playing with Olivia Newton-John?
I did the first tour with her. It was an Australian band. The management saw how, I came in the first day, everything was on
Yeah.
1,000%. They saw, "This guy's got his act together. We can form a US based band, not have to bring the Australian people over." I got to form the band with management. I didn't know it was gonna be 15 years of that, and one of my favorite personal relationships in my life that I'll treasure forever was working with her. You wouldn't think that the guy in Danger Danger or Simon Phillips's group would be doing that again, because I loved the music and I loved her.
Yeah.
It wasn't the same set of challenges as playing Simon's music. That's a whole different thing. But I don't think many people that could play Simon's gig could play that gig as well. I don't say that braggadociously.
Right. Yeah.
I'm just saying, to do it authentically and to really care about it, it was perfect because she would work over the course of a year, maybe a couple months, 3 months spread out. So I still had time to do Simon's band. I still had time to do my band. So all those things, and along with the session stuff, and now that I've gotten into teaching, that I have found a way somehow to have a living making music now. So again, your question was coming from a different direction about what players misunderstand,
Yeah.
but maybe just to illuminate the importance of, those things that I'm mentioning: the work ethic, the respect for yourself, and for the other people on the bandstand, and and respecting the audience. That was, as an MP for Olivia, I could have messed with arrangements. I could have inserted more of myself into the gig, but I knew that person coming into that gig, that's not what they want. If they're coming to my show, okay, game on, But in that situation, I wanna present that music the way that they wanna hear it, and that
Yeah.
that was the
They
that was
expect to hear it. Yeah.
yeah, that's the fun, that's the session guy, that's the team player wanting it to be great.
It's a great attitude, man.
Mm.
Yeah, I'm sure that was definitely an honor. I would
Fun.
have been like in awe because, as a kid, I had the hots for big time.
Man, yeah, Have You Never Been Mellow came out in '73 or '4. I remember being in grade school, and on Friday, the music teacher would let us bring records, and some of the girls brought in some Olivia stuff, and I heard that voice and went, "Oh, it just melted your heart, man." And it did, to the very last tour, she's amazing.
She was definitely amazing.
A great human being, the beyond the music.
That's good to hear. That's
People would
good to
always
hear.
ask, what was she like? And it was like, better than you could imagine. Just
Well, that's
it was
it.
authentic.
Well, I'll elaborate really quickly because we'll get this wrapped up.
Okay, man.
But I think you made a good point because it also relates to confidence and it also relates to stage fright. So I
Mm.
think, prepared for me at least, the more prepared that I am, it eliminates all that fear, of playing, a gig.
Yeah.
Whereas I think that a lot of people's fear comes from their lack of confidence. If you have lack of confidence, most generally it's going to be because you don't believe that you can, do it, that you can't pull
Yeah.
it off. And if you, the more prepared that you are, the more confidence that you're going to have. At least for me, that's why.
No, that
And,
that makes total sense. Yeah.
for you to always be prepared like that, that's a
Yeah.
great work ethic. And so,
There's still the nerves. There's always
so,
there's always and people need to know that. Don't feel so bad if you got stage fright or you got, that kind of nervousness, because that's natural, and it
yeah,
should be there because that means you care.
yeah,
But what you're saying is a great way. There's two things to combat that. obviously being as prepared as you can, but then experience, because I grew up a very shy kid, so I had massive stage fright in my early gigs. But the more you do it, that's the thing. If you're only gigging occasionally, it's going to be harder. But the preparation, and then just try to get out there as much as you can, and say yes to just the smallest of gigs, just to do it.
Yeah, that's also very important too, Andy. I like that you brought that up because your beginning was getting out there and playing
Yeah,
consistently,
exactly
eh,
that.
as opposed to a lot of these kids that they're amazing players, but they're sitting in their room.
It's a different time.
Yeah. If you could offer any advice to aspiring musicians, what would that be?
For me, you'll hear people say, "Well, I didn't have any choice. This is just what I was meant to do, and I didn't have any other interest." And that's true for me. It has to start with the love of it. If you're really loving the pursuit of making music and improving your craft, whatever it might be, then you're in for some good times as far as, the reward of. Obviously, you have to figure out how to diversify, how to, somehow make a living do it. And if it's supplemented by other work, that's totally fine. And some people, will have a day job or other things that they do for income. And if that feeds them the ability to be able to play music more, then that's win-win. Don't feel like you're not a failure if you're having to do other things for the reality of, paying bills, right? But if that love is there, you're gonna always do it, and you'll find ways along the way. That's the best advice, is keep in mind the original inspiration. Don't lose sight of why you're doing it, or why you started doing it, I should say. That the complete love of hearing the if you're a guitar player, hearing the guitar, seeing the guitar, anything about the music, that, just constantly feed that, feed your soul with that. And then let that be the inspiration to keep going.
That's awesome advice, Andy.
Right, man.
Yeah, so I want to thank you, sincerely for your time.
Thanks,
And
John. I wish you luck on the book, and I'm looking forward to hearing your music now that I know you're an upside down lefty like Eric and
oh,
Albert
yeah,
King.
time, man. It was
Yeah.
a pleasure talking to you.
Pleasure talking to you too. I've enjoyed seeing the Kiss shirt. It makes me happy.
Yeah, take care, buddy. Bye bye.